At our 8th wedding anniversary party, for the first time, I didn't stay silent, as my billionaire husband always preferred. The party ended, and he said to me, "You'll sleep on the couch until you apologize." I simply smiled and replied, "All right." The next morning, he woke up to an empty room and divorce papers lying on the cold table. My name is Juniper Hawthorne, 35 years old, and I live with my husband, Silas Whitmore, a real estate billionaire, in a penthouse overlooking the Detroit River, where everything sparkles like a dream, except me. Every week, I receive a $600 allowance from my own husband. Not because I can't earn money, but because he wants me to stay quiet, in the most literal sense. Everything, from the credit card, the SUV I drive, to my breakfast, is controlled by Silas. Each morning, I make his coffee, iron his shirts, prepare his schedule, like a personal assistant, except unpaid, and always expected to smile. This morning, as he stepped out of the bedroom, and I had just finished folding the collar of his shirt, he looked at me and said, "Tonight is our 8th anniversary. Wear the dress I picked. And don't say anything foolish." I nodded, as usual. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. Maybe a romantic dinner. Perhaps candles, red wine, a quiet restaurant, or simply just him and me. But when the driver dropped us at the Whitney Hotel, I realized I was mistaken. It was an investor gathering for the Haven Estates project. No candles, no music, just Silas, a group of men in suits, and Brittany Lowell, his chief accountant, someone I'd never once heard him mention. I stood to the side, holding a glass of champagne no one had asked if I even wanted. Silas stood in the middle of the room, one arm gently resting on Brittany's waist, and said to everyone, "The one who keeps everything in the company running smoothly." I saw Brittany's hand settle on his chest, then curl around his neck, embracing him in front of everyone. When she let go, she even adjusted his collar, like she'd done it 100 times before. I couldn't stand still any longer. I stepped forward, my voice trembling but clear. "Seems your job isn't just accounting, is it, Brittany?" The room fell silent. Someone coughed. Silas frowned, and Brittany smirked. "You've misunderstood." Silas grabbed the mic, forced a laugh, and said, "Sorry, everyone, my wife's a little emotional." Social laughter trickled in. But I knew. They were laughing at me, not with me. On the way home, he said nothing. When we entered the apartment, the ceiling lights were blinding, cutting through every inch of silence between us. As I was slipping off my shoes, he said coldly, "You'll sleep on the couch until you apologize." To me and to Brittany, without another word, he walked into the bedroom and closed the door, as if I were a maid disturbing the master's rest. I stood there, in the emerald silk dress he had picked out, lipstick smudged, eyes blurred with tears, and quietly sat down on the sofa. This home, spacious, beautiful, expensive, felt cold and alien tonight. I looked around at the white walls, the pale leather couch, the wedding photo framed above the fireplace, and wondered, why, in all this abundance, do I feel like I'm disappearing? I removed my wedding ring, held it in my palm, and whispered a question that no one could answer. If this is love, why do I feel so small? I stayed awake the entire night. City lights flickered through the window, as if to say I'd already seen enough. The next morning, I looked in the mirror, swollen eyes, tangled hair, but there was a steady fierceness in my own gaze. I whispered, "Enough." I placed a blank sheet of paper on the table, picked up a pen, and wrote each line as if signing a contract with myself. Divorce papers, no tears, no trembling. I walked to his desk, left the envelope next to the untouched coffee cup. I had already sent a message to my mother. "I've moved out and left the divorce papers. I'm okay." Before stepping out of the apartment, I looked back one last time and whispered like the wind, "You can keep the money." As for me, I'm taking back my name. I left the Whitmore residence while Detroit was still half asleep. A thin mist blanketed the river, reflecting faint bands of yellow light. I could clearly hear the sound of my heels striking the cold, slick pavement, a strange, liberating sound I never realized I had craved so much. I didn't cry, didn't look back. Each step felt lighter, yet strangely hollow, as if part of me still lingered in that 38th floor apartment. When the taxi stopped in front of a small hotel in Midtown, I rented a room on the second floor, its window facing a street lined with oak trees. The room was barely 25 square meters, a single bed, an old wooden desk, and a mini coffee pot on a shelf. But I remember smiling for the first time in months. I slipped off my shoes, sat on the bed, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Welcome back, Juniper." On the other side of the city, I knew Silas was waking up. He always got up at 6 a.m., right on time, like the internal clock of a man who runs a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. I pictured him stretching, putting on his robe, walking to his desk, reaching for his coffee, and finding the envelope I left behind. He might have laughed. He's not the kind of man who believes anyone could ever leave him, especially me, the woman he used to call sweet and obedient. I once heard him say at a party, "Juniper's not going anywhere. She's got nothing without me." I imagined the moment he opened the envelope, unfolded the divorce papers, and read each direct line. I, Juniper Hawthorne Whitmore, request to end this marriage due to irreconcilable differences. Maybe he scoffed, then tossed the paper aside. I could almost hear him say, "You've got nothing to leave with." But just a few hours later, I knew that wasn't true anymore. A friend of mine, who works the front desk at Whitmore Tower, texted me, "Silas just stormed out of the garage, pale as a ghost." No one knows what happened. I stayed silent, setting my phone down. He didn't know I left with nothing. No clothes, no jewelry, no money. Only a second copy of the divorce papers in my purse, just in case he tore up the first. I wanted to leave him silently, cleanly, with no begging, no trace, so that, for the first time in 8 years, he would have to feel the emptiness I had lived with. At the same time, I knew he had called my mother. I replayed the voicemail. "Your mom said if I didn't have anything kind to say, I shouldn't call again." His voice was hoarse. "Juniper, where do you think you're going without me?" I didn't reply. I simply opened the curtain, let the morning light spill across the cars below, and took a sip of black coffee, the kind he once banned me from drinking because it doesn't suit women. For the first time, that bitterness soothed me. Maybe because it was real, unfiltered, unapologetic. Just like me, no longer pretending to be the obedient woman in his world. I leaned back in the chair, smiled faintly, and drifted to sleep without realizing. This shock may have left him shaken, but for me, it was a beginning. A real beginning. I woke up as sunlight slipped through the dull beige curtains and struck my eyes. My neck ached from sleeping sideways, and the suitcase I had set down in the corner remained untouched. I hadn't even bothered to open it last night. When I checked my phone, there was an unread message from someone I used to work with at the charity foundation and a few missed calls from unnamed numbers. I didn't touch any of them. Instead, I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat by the window, and watched Detroit come alive in its morning rush. I opened the one notebook I had brought, tucked inside my worn tote bag, and wrote just 3 lines. I did it. No going back. Now, I live real. I turned to a blank page, hesitated for a moment, then called my mother. The line didn't even ring for 3 seconds before her voice answered, gentle, as if she had been waiting for that call for a very long time. "Juniper?" I swallowed hard, my voice cracking. "I did it, Mom." "I left," she didn't ask. "Are you okay?" Or, "Why did you take so long to call?" She just let out a soft breath and replied, "Good. Freedom isn't free, but it's worth more than everything." I cried. Not loudly, just warm, silent tears. She said nothing more. She just let the silence be, as if she understood that after 8 years of being bound tightly, I needed time to adjust to the sensation of having finally cut the invisible rope that had gripped me every day. After the call, I went down to the front desk and asked to extend my stay by 3 more nights. The woman on duty, named Carla, looked at me for a moment and then smiled gently. "We have a program here to support women who've lost their homes due to divorce. Would you like to register?" I gave a small smile and nodded, while also shaking my head. I didn't lose my home. I chose to leave it. I spent the rest of the morning walking around Midtown. No destination, no schedule. I passed a second-hand bookstore, a dried flower shop, a yoga studio with sun symbols on the glass. I felt myself existing, not as Silas's wife, not as the one who coordinated his calendar, not as the perfect daughter-in-law admired by his elite circle. Just me, Juniper, a woman learning how to live without asking permission. That afternoon, I visited a studio apartment for rent near the Rouge River. It was a small space with wooden floors, a kitchenette connected to the living area, and a west-facing window that caught the sunset. The landlord was a soft-spoken woman named Nora, probably in her 60s, who didn't ask many questions. She handed me the key with a quiet note. "If you need a place to start over, this was mine when I left my husband 28 years ago. It's quiet, and no one will bother you." I took the key, and my hand trembled, not from fear, but from relief. For the first time in years, I signed a lease with my own name. No husband's approval needed, no budget checks, no permission. That evening, I went to the grocery store nearby and bought some cereal, milk, 2 rolls of toilet paper, and a bundle of dried lavender. At the checkout counter, I remembered that my personal credit card had been deactivated years ago, Silas's way of managing the household finances. I pulled out the last $100 bill in my wallet, paid, and smiled to myself as I carried the bag through the dark street. When I placed the lavender into a glass jar on the small kitchen table, its calming scent spread through the apartment. I knew my life from now on wouldn't be as comfortable as before. I would have to relearn how to live, with my own bank account, my own time, my real identity. But at the very least, I could walk into the kitchen and make any coffee I liked. I could write in my notebook without worrying about someone reading over my shoulder. I could play music, cry, laugh, without being told I was a nuisance. And most importantly, I could say my name, fully, clearly, without standing in anyone's shadow. I was arranging a few personal items on the low shelf in my new rental apartment. Some old books, an empty jewelry box, a jar of lavender candles. Each small thing made me feel like I was reclaiming control. Then my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a beat, then answered. "Ms. Juniper, it's me, Lisa Tran." I froze. Lisa? Silas's personal assistant, the one who used to bring me tea whenever I visited his office, always polite, always smiling, but never overstepping. "I'm sorry for calling out of the blue, but I think you should know." Her voice quivered slightly. I walked to the chair, sat down, placed my coffee cup on the table, and felt the tension pass through the phone. Lisa paused for a moment, then let it out like a weight being lifted. "This morning, at the 12th floor reception desk, a few of us were talking about last night. When you left the event at the Whitney, one of the women, Ellen from HR, sighed and said straight out, 'That Brittany is a snake, not even the chief accountant. She just slept her way into that position.'" I stiffened. Lisa continued, her words spilling out after what sounded like a sleepless night. "Right then, Brittany walked in. Don't know if she heard everything, but she looked at us, face cold as ice. Then she pointed right at me and said, 'Anyone who wants to keep their job better, shut their mouth.'" Silence. "Ms. Juniper, I'm not the kind of person who gets involved. But the way she threatened us, after hugging the boss in front of everyone, I just couldn't take it anymore." I let out a soft breath. Lisa lowered her voice. "I saw some of the internal expense invoices. Dinner parties, spa bills, Hermes bags. Brittany used the company card. But the approving signature was always Silas, and most of it happened while you were still living with him. My stomach turned like it was being scorched. I'd seen luxury boxes in the back seat, handbags Brittany brought to the office still with tags. But what did I do? I looked away, thinking, maybe she's just really good at her job. Do you have copies of those invoices? I asked, my voice dry. I snapped a few photos. I'll send them to your personal email, but don't use the company one. IT reports to Brittany now. I looked out the window. The Detroit wind rustled the curtains. Thank you, Lisa. Stay safe, and don't trust anyone at the company, not even the ones who smile at you. I don't trust anyone, except you, she replied softly. The call ended. I sat still for a few minutes, then opened my laptop. 2 minutes later, the email arrived. Attached were photo files of the invoices. A dinner worth over $6,000 at a Napa Valley restaurant. A Hermes bag purchase for $8,750. A $3,400 spa treatment in Arizona. Payee, Brittany Lowell. Approved by Silas Whitmore. Account, Operating Fund, Whitmore Development. I printed them with the old printer I had tucked into the wardrobe, ink smudged on the edges, but still legible. I didn't feel pain, I felt validated. Everything I had sensed over 8 years wasn't paranoia, wasn't imagination. It was real. A system upheld by power, money, and contempt. I slipped each page into a white envelope, sealed it, and wrote a single bold line across the front. It has begun. At that moment, I didn't think of myself as someone seeking revenge. I was simply a woman, seeing the truth for the first time. And for once, I didn't look away. That evening, after a hot shower and wrapping myself in a light beige robe left behind by the former tenant, I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and logged into the archive system of the Detroit Women's Hope Foundation, where I had once worked for 4 years. I was no longer on the staff, but I still had access to duplicate quarterly donor reports. Partly because I was always meticulous, and partly because I wanted to believe that, if anything ever seemed off, I'd be the first to catch it. I opened the FY 2020-Q4 folder, then Donor Breakdown, and scrolled to Whitmore Development, Corporate Pledge. Under Amount Received, I saw the figure, $73,000. Transfer date, November 18th last year. I remembered clearly that day Silas had said on the phone, "Don't come to the office anymore. Just have them send in the $100,000. I had nodded, heart warming a little. I thought, at least, he respected the work I did. But now, on the report, there was only $73,000. So, where did the remaining $27,000 go? I scrolled to the source company column, where it should have said Whitmore Development. But no, the words that appeared sent a chill through me. Miles Consulting LLC. An unfamiliar name. I opened a new tab and searched Michigan's business registry. The page loaded. Miles Consulting LLC, registered in Troy, listed agent Brittany Lowell. I sat in silence for a few seconds, as if someone had slapped me across the face. I returned to Lisa's forwarded invoices, and just as I suspected, in the notes for the restaurant, spa, and Hermes expenses, the name Miles Consulting showed up multiple times. I began to see it clearly. They hadn't donated anything. They funneled company money through Brittany's shell company to fabricate a charity donation, then pocketed the nearly $30,000 difference as a consulting fee. A pretty name for theft. The money that actually reached the foundation was just the cover, used to mask their affair. On paper, it looked like philanthropy. In truth, it was a sophisticated laundering scheme wrapped in the illusion of kindness, and I, unknowingly, had been made into the moral shield they hid behind. I printed the reports, invoices, and related emails. The old printer whirred and clacked in the small room like a ticking clock. I placed everything into a brown envelope, sealed it, then wrote in black ink, "Not all donations go where they're meant to." I placed the envelope in a locked drawer. Then I wrote another line. Clear, cold, like drafting an indictment. Silas Whitmore authorized improper fund transfers from Whitmore Development through Miles Consulting, LLC, owned by Brittany Lowell, to embezzle charity funds. I underlined the names, then whispered to myself, the kindness he boasts about is just a coat of paint over theft. The desk lamp reflected off the white page, and for the first time in years, I realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. I was no longer the wife banished to the couch. I was becoming a witness to my own life. And I knew each piece of evidence I uncovered would be another crack in the wall of power that bore the name Whitmore. The next morning, a light rain fell over Detroit. Tiny droplets clung to the glass, reflecting the dim streetlights. I sat at the kitchen table, holding a muffin from the bakery down the street, but could barely take a bite. My mind kept circling around the name Brittany Lowell, the woman who had taken my husband, siphoned company funds, and put her name on a fake company to process charitable donations. Then the phone rang. Unknown number, area code from Grosse Pointe. I hesitated, then answered. Juniper? A calm, deep female voice. I froze for a moment. Eleanor Whitmore, Silas's sister, a woman I'd met a few times at family functions. She had always kept her distance, with sharp, cold eyes and a composed presence, as if she'd seen far too much to need words. I saw the video of you speaking up at that event the other night, she said. An old colleague forwarded it to me. What you did was brave, and if you're starting to pull at the threads, then I think it's time I stop staying silent. I swallowed. The rain kept tapping on the window, the smell of warm coffee still in the air. He did something similar to me, Eleanor continued, her voice steady but tinged with bitterness. Not infidelity, but manipulation, subtle, patient, and cruel. She spoke evenly, her tone low, each sentence cutting through the air like a blade. Back then, I was managing the Whitmore Family Trust, the investment fund our parents set up before they passed. I held 35% of the shares, enough to have a voice. But after our father's funeral, Silas started showing up more at financial meetings, claiming he was representing his younger brother. At first, I let it go, thought it was just family. Then he did 3 things. First, he slowly moved the investment accounts to a management firm under his control, claiming it was more efficient, more professional. Whenever I objected, he'd say I didn't understand finance, that I was too emotional, and he'd say it in front of the board to make me look weak. Second, he charmed my CFO, promised her a promotion if she sent the financial reports directly to him. A few months later, I realized the numbers in my reports had been altered. When I asked to see the originals, Silas sent back an updated version, saying I was confused because of stress. And third, Eleanor paused, looking out the window where the rain ran in fine, slanting lines. He started manipulating perception, sending midnight emails to board members, implying I was losing control, frequently missing meetings, overreacting. Just whispers, but repeated until everyone believed I was no longer fit to lead. She gave a soft laugh, a laugh with no joy. 3 months later, they forced me off the board for lack of transparency and temporary incapacity. Silas took over full control of the trust our parents left behind. I became the difficult, unstable woman in the eyes of my former staff. I sat there, stunned, listening. Eleanor continued. I stayed silent. I thought silence was the only way to protect the family name. Until I saw you, standing in the middle of that event, surrounded by the same people who once applauded him. That's when I knew, if I stayed silent any longer, I'd be complicit in the very rot he's built. Her voice dropped, roughened. I have internal transaction records from Whitmore Development, the account Silas used to send money to Miles Consulting. I kept them from last year, back when I was still a minority shareholder. He doesn't know I have them. Why are you helping me? I asked, softly but firmly. Not out of suspicion, just wanting to understand why she was breaking her long silence. because if I don't, someone else will be swallowed whole by the very system my family created. An hour later, we met at a small cafe, tucked deep in a midtown alley, far from the real estate elite. Eleanor arrived on time, wearing a gray coat and a knit cap. No purse, just a thick envelope in hand. "I don't trust sending this by email. You should keep it," she said. I took the envelope, opened it. Inside were color printouts of transaction statements from the operating Legacy Projects account at Whitmore Development. The bolded lines read, "Transaction date, November 18th. Purpose, community outreach, education support. Amount, $1 million. Payee, Miles Consulting, LLC/approved by Silas Whitmore." I gripped the paper tightly, Miles Consulting again. But then I saw another sheet clipped behind. Not a statement, but a short internal audit memo, typed in black ink stamped "Confidential, not for board distribution." Just a few lines, but each one a punch to the gut. The email systems and financial transactions of Miles Consulting were accessed from the IP address matching the deputy CFO's office at Whitmore Development headquarters. I wasn't tech-savvy, but I knew exactly what that meant. Brittany, running her private company, the one draining funds, was operating it from inside the very office I used to walk into every morning to bring Silas his coffee. Miles Consulting wasn't in Troy. On paper, yes. Maybe a rented mailbox, a vacant suite, or a name on a glass door. But in truth, all activity was being conducted from the 27th floor of Whitmore Tower, right behind the glass wall I used to clean for Silas every Friday afternoon. She never had to go anywhere to deceive, because the deceit lived right there, in the system, within the company itself, shielded, funded, and protected by Silas. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally stood up, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a witness to a rotting system run by my husband. And this time, I wasn't going to look away. "Don't let them keep doing this to you," Eleanor said, soft as a goodbye. "If you still believe in justice, follow it through. This time you won't be alone." I walked out of the cafe, still clutching the envelope with the statements and the audit report Eleanor had handed me. The Boston sky had darkened, February wind rustling through my hair, carrying with it the briny scent of the harbor and a strange clarity. Everything I once avoided is now rising, layer by layer. I knew Eleanor hadn't told me everything, but she had said enough for me to understand. Silas didn't just betray love, he crushed his own blood. I needed more proof, and I knew exactly where to start, with the only person who ever dared call me, just to whisper one sentence. "They're playing dirty." Lisa Tran's email arrived at 6:22 p.m., containing only a single sentence and a screenshot of a meeting schedule. "Silas meeting with investors at the Whitney Hotel, Orchid Room, 7:30 tonight. Brittany will be there." I sat in the car, watching the message glow on my phone screen, my heartbeat slowing. I typed one line back. "Thank you." No period. 1 hour later, I walked into the lobby of the Whitney Hotel, the same place Silas had hosted the very first fundraiser for the Legacy Foundation last year. I wore a long camel coat, my hair tied in a low bun, nude lipstick, looking like any other finance sector employee winding down after work. No one paid attention. I picked a seat at the bar in the corner of the lobby, ordered a sparkling water, and pulled out my phone. At exactly 7:28, the elevator doors opened. Silas stepped out first, Brittany behind him. Hand in hand. She was smiling broadly, the kind of smile of someone who doesn't believe anyone is watching. Silas leaned in, said something, and she laid her hand on his chest. I took the shot. Click. A clear photo, then another, as they turned toward the Orchid Room, the VIP meeting suite reserved for discreet signings. Under the soft amber lights, they looked like a polished power couple about to seal a major deal. And they were. Except this deal might just be the beginning of their end. I sipped my water. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't cold. But something inside me had shifted. Not rage anymore. Something far more unnerving. a stillness so calm it felt surgical. If I could keep this clarity, I would let every piece of their puzzle collapse, on the very stage they built, using my silence and my money. The next morning, I withdrew $5,000 from the allowance account that Silas still transferred monthly, the light spending for the chairman's wife, as he once said, half joking, half controlling. I hadn't touched that money in almost 2 months, just saving it. Maybe deep down, I always knew this day would come. That afternoon, Silas appeared at the door of the small apartment I now rented. No tailored suit, no media-ready smile, just fury in his eyes and a voice laced with contempt. Divorce? How long do you think you'll survive? I didn't flinch. I stood in the center of the room, still holding my warm cup of coffee, and answered slowly, I spent 8 years not living. Now I'm finally alive. He gripped the leather handle of his briefcase tighter, didn't respond, just glanced around the room, small, plain, but free, and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the concrete hallway, fading, and I stood there, not trembling, not afraid. Only an eerie calm settled deep in my chest, as if for the first time in 8 years, I had control over something in my life. That afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the frosted glass windows of a law office in downtown Detroit, I stepped into the office of Margaret Davis, the attorney who had once represented the Charity Foundation during its founding phase. This morning, I had said goodbye to Silas. Now I was ready to write the next chapter, with paperwork, evidence, and justice. Margaret's office was just as modest as I remembered. White walls, shelves heavy with files, and a framed family photo in the corner. She looked up when she saw me, didn't ask too many questions, just pulled out a chair and said, All right, tell me everything you know. I handed her the bank statement for the operating legacy projects account, detailing a $100,000 transfer to Miles Consulting, along with the scanned internal audit report Eleanor had given me. I also sent over all the photos of Silas and Brittany holding hands as they exited the private room at the Whitney Hotel. Margaret reviewed each page like reading a familiar score, nodding. This is a conflict of interest, a violation of financial ethics. There's enough to initiate an investigation. She immediately began drafting a formal complaint to the Michigan State Financial Oversight Commission. By that afternoon, 3 witness statements were completed. Eleanor, Silas's sister, formally agreed to testify, providing an archived email from 2016 confirming her original ownership role in the foundation. Lisa, the front desk employee, signed a declaration stating she had seen internal invoices approved out of process, and that Brittany had shown up at the office multiple times during work hours without logging in. In a single day, the balance of power shifted, and I, the woman once banished from the bedroom, was now the one holding the key to unlock the doors of justice. 3 days after the case was submitted to the Michigan State Financial Oversight Commission, the headline, Breaking News, flashed across the morning news. Whitmore Development under investigation for financial fraud and misuse of charitable funds. Beneath it was an image of the company headquarters in Troy, the same place once adorned with banners praising community development projects. Now, the front gate swarmed with reporters shouting questions, while Silas appeared faintly behind the second-story frosted glass, his eyes confused, his hair unkempt. I sat in my small apartment, once a temporary shelter for a woman abandoned, now a war room of quiet resistance. In my hand was a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, something I'd never touched before. But this morning, its bitterness felt strangely comforting. The broadcast shifted to footage of Brittany, but not at a boardroom or charity gala as before. The screen displayed a single line, Brittany Holloway, whereabouts unknown. Police seeking for investigation. According to Lisa, she had emptied her personal accounts, deactivated all social media, and vanished from Detroit just hours after the leak. That evening, I received a short message from Eleanor. He's suspended. Silas had been officially removed from his position as CEO in an emergency board session that afternoon. No farewell, no speech, just a deactivated access badge, and a man who once believed himself untouchable, now locked out of the very building he used to humiliate me. I set my cup down, looked out the window dusted with snow, not with satisfaction, just calm. As if, finally, things were falling back into place. The snow was still falling lightly outside the window when I heard the knock. 3 heavy raps, then silence. I didn't need the peephole to know who it was. Silas stood there, no designer suit, no Swiss watch, just a man with sunken eyes and stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to act strong. "I've lost everything," he exhaled, voice hoarse, each word catching in his throat. "Are you satisfied now?" I didn't respond right away. I gently opened the door, letting the light from the kitchen fall across part of his face, the face that once stirred my heart, and later shattered it. "You haven't lost everything," I said, my tone so calm it surprised even me. "You still have yourself." "If you're willing to look," I turned inside, opened the desk drawer, and pulled out a sealed white envelope. Inside was the finalized divorce decree, court-stamped in bright red, along with a handwritten note that read, "I didn't leave for money. I left because I chose the truth." I handed him the envelope without hesitation. Silas took it, but didn't open it. He just stood there, in the old hallway where I once cried through sleepless nights, completely silent for the first time in 8 years. No more blame, no more persuasion, just raw, unadorned defeat. And I, the woman once pushed out of her own bedroom, now stood tall, no resentment, no need to win, only the need to be whole. He turned away without another word. I closed the door softly behind him, like closing the final page of an old chapter. 3 months later, on a soft April morning, I sat on the courthouse steps outside Wayne County Court, a lukewarm coffee in hand, sunlight spilling lightly across the patchy brick walkway. Inside, the judge delivered the sentence. Silas Whitmore, found responsible for misusing charitable funds, committing personal financial fraud, and ordered to repay all misappropriated amounts. The voice reading the verdict echoed from the loudspeaker of Courtroom 3. Silas arrived alone. Brittany had shown up a week earlier, handcuffed, her once smug confidence now replaced by a late-coming resignation. She turned herself in when she realized there was no more running. During interrogation, Brittany confessed everything, from using company credit cards for personal expenses to conspiring with Dallas. The CFOI had only met once at a fall gala last year. The truth was now exposed. Numbers that once existed only in spreadsheets had turned into binding sentences. A message appeared. Lisa Tran. She's now under the protection of the Michigan State's Internal Witness Program. Her once burgundy-colored hair now cut short, her workplace identity fully changed. But her tone in the message remained familiar. Still the soft-spoken sharpness of the receptionist brave enough to speak the truth. "You did the right thing. I'm free now," I smiled. Not from victory, but because at least someone had escaped the spiral of silence and fear, the same trap that held me captive for 8 years. And now, those who once thought they could build empires on other people's money are left standing on sand. I officially reclaimed the name Hawthorne, my mother's maiden name, as a way to begin again, free from the Whitmore legacy that once bound me. I rented a small riverside apartment in Grand Rapids, not spacious, but with soft afternoon light that streamed through the kitchen window, just enough to brew a cup of tea and draft a new plan. I partnered with Margaret Davis, the attorney who had helped me file my first report, and Eleanor, Silas's sister, who had quietly gathered evidence and stood as a witness despite family pressure. The 3 of us launched a small firm called Hawthorne Advisory, dedicated to helping women escape financial control, from legal consulting, asset management, to rebuilding careers after divorce or coercion. The office wasn't large, just 3 workrooms and a guest area tiled in white ceramic. But every woman who walked in carried a story and left with steadier eyes. Lisa Tran became our office manager. On her first day, she beamed, "Now I work for someone I actually respect." I laughed and handed her a new nameplate. Inside, a strange feeling settled. Not triumph, not vengeance, but quiet peace at last. One chilly Sunday afternoon, Clara, my mother, unexpectedly appeared at my riverside apartment, holding a basket of oranges and an unfinished tray of baked goods. We sat in the small kitchen, having dinner under the warm yellow light, with chicken soup I had just learned to make, and a napkin she embroidered when I was still in high school. She didn't say much about the past, only asked, "Are you sleeping well? Are you eating enough?" I nodded, then slowly said, "I'm not afraid of being poor anymore. I'm only afraid of forgetting who I am." She paused, then smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in years. "You just found the woman your father once believed in, the one who never let anyone silence her." I teared up, remembering the old kitchen in Ann Arbor, where my father once placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "You won't need anyone to hold you up if you stand up on your own." That night, when she left, I stood watching her fade behind the riverside trees, and for the first time in years, I felt my heart soften like still water. The small seminar held at the Riverside Community Center drew more than 40 women, of all ages, professions, and backgrounds. On a humble stage with a white backdrop and a small pot of lavender, I shared my story, unembellished, unfiltered. At the end, I paused for a moment and said, "If someone tells you to sleep on the couch, let them sleep with their conscience." The room erupted in laughter, not because it was funny, but because they understood. After the laughter came a long rising applause, not for me, but for themselves, for the women who once stayed silent and now dared to speak. That night, I returned to my little apartment, opened the balcony door, and stood watching the sunset behind Detroit's skyline. I sipped black coffee, still bitter, but now strangely soothing, the very coffee Silas once banned, saying I couldn't handle the bitterness. A soft breeze swept through my hair, and I whispered, as if to my past self, "You once told me I wouldn't survive without you. But the truth is, I never lived, until I left you." The screen fades to black slowly, my voice still echoing gently. Freedom isn't revenge, it's recovery. That's my story. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching this from. Hit like if you've ever stepped through pain and kept standing. And share this video with a woman you care about, because maybe, just maybe, she needs to hear this story too. To remember, freedom has no age. Recovery needs no permission.